Would you rather have root canal treatment or learn to sit with your feelings? Now, there's an odd question. Why am I asking? What does it even mean? Why is it necessary? And how do you even do it? Not the root canal option. That's a red herring. Your relationship with your feelings will, in part, shape the way you look after yourself emotionally and mentally and how you connect with the people you love. So have a listen to my latest conversation with Ryan, where we have a lively chin wag about what sitting with feelings means, what stops most of us, the impact of avoiding our emotions, and some ideas of how to sit with your feelings. Welcome to Man Talk, a podcast of real conversations about life, your life, our life, and the emotional well-being of men. My name is Howard Todd-Collins. I'm the Director of Men and Relationships Counselling, a private counselling practice. Thank you for being here. Please sit back and relax and join me for the latest episode of Man Talk. Hello. I hope you're doing well wherever you are. The conversation coming up is an important one because I think most of us have to navigate the discomfort of emotions from time to time. And so I encourage you as you listen to think about how and what you're doing to take care of yourself emotionally. Some of the ideas in the conversation are not meant as advice. Some of the things that Ryan and I talk about may just not be for you, which is fine. Sitting with your feelings, as you will hear, takes practice and skill. It's quite possibly something you already do well, or the conversation may trigger your need for more support. And if so, please reach out to people in your location or check the show notes to see how you and I can actually work together. Have a listen and please enjoy. I had a conversation with a client of mine quite a long time ago, a couple of years ago now, and we were talking about sitting with feelings. And it was the first conversation with this guy. And I said to him, what do you expect of therapy and counselling? And we talked a bit about what was going on for him, but also I said, how do you feel about having feelings? And he kind of looked at me with this sort of glazed look and confused look. What do you mean? What kind of question is that? And it was a conversation starter. He ended up working with me for about a year. But the conversation went along the lines of, he said to me, I would rather have root canal than having to sit with my emotions. And I thought, well, we've got some work to do here because this is important stuff to understand. But also, we began talking about how we learn about feelings and what does that actually mean to sit with our feelings, but also who teaches us anything about emotion. I began talking to him about a sort of term that I've become quite familiar with, which is meta-emotion, which is a bit of research that was done with parenting of kids and parents looking at their emotional development of their kids and what it means to promote emotional development in their child. And to be able to do that, we need to know what we're comfortable with for ourselves, but also for our kids. So meta-emotion literally means the way we feel about our feelings. It's the core work of my conversations with blokes. And of course, it became the core work of my own personal development over a period of time. So there is something about sitting with feelings and what that actually means for all of us, not just for men. And that's the kind of conversation that we're going to have today. And I was particularly struck by the idea that he initially wanted to have or prefer root canal treatment than sitting with his own feelings. And I'm curious about how have you learned about this in your life? Sitting with feelings, and what does that actually even mean?
Through trial and error, mainly. And I found that usually change happens when you just feel forced to change, when there's such a strong push to change. Because I imagine that people come to you to see you as a counsellor because they have challenges that they're going through, but feelings that are very difficult and challenging to feel. And at some point, it's like your body or your mind sending you a message saying, hey, something's not working here. We need to change. We need to do something about it. And at some point, that becomes so overwhelming that it forces you to take action.
Yeah.
And I think early on, that's when I mainly took action and sat with difficult feelings because I almost felt like I didn't have any choice.
There's a point in which for you it was building up into something that you could not avoid in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then hopefully, I think over time, I started to recognize that by addressing that stuff, it reduced more pain and suffering in the long term by actually attending to that feeling early. And I think often as men, our natural instinct is to just push away that feeling of discomfort. And you notice that often with physical symptoms, if you've got aches and pains.
Yeah.
Often, and I've done this as well a lot, I've just ignored it until the point where it starts to become so uncomfortable that it's like, I actually have to do something about it. Yeah. And then hopefully over time we learn from that, well, you're probably going to have to address it anyway.
Yeah.
So maybe get onto it a little bit sooner.
What's interesting is that when I think about my own experience of this, before I became and got involved in working with people, I probably learned a lot of avoidance for the first 20, 25 years of my life in terms of feelings. So I would ignore the signs. I think a lot of the people that I speak to probably similarly, and hopefully the listeners that are listening will know what happens when they're avoiding, like just ignoring the signs. And avoidance is literally putting your head in the sand and just pretending it's not there. And often other people notice there's something going on. And I recognize this in my relationship life, and not as much now as I used to, but my partner will know something is up before I even know something is up. Because she can see the mood changing or something in my behavior changing. And that's really common for a lot of blokes that I work with who come in and say, actually, my partner told me I should probably come because I've got a problem. And it's okay, it's a good start. So what do you know about the problem? And that's that learning about looking for signs that our emotional lives are being activated in some way. And I wonder about this in terms of emotional language. And I think we have cues that we're not always aware of. So if we're learning to sit with ourselves, we can start to notice, and they can be quite subtle experiences, that our nervous system is activated in some form. Now, I don't know what that's like for you. I know that my gut tells me a lot more that something's going on in my nervous system or my emotional life. And also my shoulders and my headaches tend to be signifiers that I'm stressed. And if I ignore them, and they tend to go away until it comes back again, and it keeps coming back, and then I ignore them. And eventually I'll sit down and think, what is happening in my life emotionally that's sitting in my body? And I think most of us don't get taught how to do that. And I'm not sure that's your experience, but knowing your body is a really good step in the first direction of sitting with something emotionally. And that's often the first teaching that I find in some of the work with the men that I work with. And I'll notice it in the chair if someone's sitting with me and they're moving around, or if their voice changes, or they're a bit uncomfortable, they're restless, or they drop a bit in their body. There's a kind of some signifier that says there is something going on in your emotional life. Let's slow down.
I think you're totally right. That's such a good way to pick up what's happening with you.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about this idea of sitting with emotion or sitting with discomfort, and that it's almost like we are biologically evolved not to.
Yeah.
Because for most of our history as humans, when you feel discomfort, then the cue is to make the discomfort go away. But until very recently, we had to put up with a lot of discomfort.
Yeah.
If you think about the way humans lived 1,000 years ago, 10,000, 40,000 years ago, imagine the level of discomfort that they had to put up with environmentally, being short of food, dealing with predators, all that sort of thing. And so that they didn't actually have to confront a lot of that because they
had to
had no
survive.
choice.
Yes.
Now, in our modern life, it's so easy to avoid discomfort.
Yes.
It's so easy for us to distract ourselves with technology.
Yeah.
To not deal with physical challenges, to just tune out, or maybe you've been sitting in an office chair all day, every day for the last 20 years. Yeah. That starts to build up. There's so many things.
Yeah.
So it's almost like we have to override our natural instincts.
Yeah. It's a really good way of putting it, because that survival brain I think you're talking about really is fight or flight. And essentially, back in the day, you just have to survive and literally fight for your life if you were threatened by a predator in some way. I think there are men that I speak to, and I think I felt this early on in my life. If I had a feeling like fear, or I was worried or anxious, my natural instinct would be to close it down and shut it down and hide it and pretend that I was okay. So that was the early mask that I would wear as a young bloke growing up, I think, is, I'm not feeling good. I'm worried about something, but I'll just ignore it. It'll go away and everything's cool. Nothing to see here. That kind of avoidance part of my brain that said, we don't do that kind of feeling. We don't, as a bloke, I don't talk about it. I hide it quite well until eventually it stopped working because I was quite a sensitive kid. I would cry a lot. Ask my brother. I would cry at the drop of a hat almost, but I'd hate crying. I eventually grew up and thought, I'm just going to stop crying because it's all the judgment that would go with it. But my brain will go into that more survival instinct of hiding, not necessarily fighting. I would actually hide and withdraw. And I think that's part of the pattern that shows up for people even today. I think we're getting better at it, men talking about themselves a lot more than we ever used to. But there's this kind of survival instinct that's still there. I don't need help. I'm not going to seek help. Any emotion I feel is the kind of domain of my partner. It's not for me. This kind of men don't cry thing that's still out there for a lot of people. Men rather hide what they're feeling as opposed to confront it. And there is something about learning to do it differently that you're talking about that I think you and I know is good for us. But what happens if we keep avoiding? What do you think is the impact of avoidance on people, their relationships, their mental health? What do you reckon?
I think I can only speak for me. Like I know for me, the biggest alarm bell is when I feel nothing.
Yeah.
That's when that's a really strong sign for me to say, this is not heading in a good direction. Because I think I can recognize the pattern of previous times when I felt nothing for too long. So that's actually become more of a sign for me to take action.
So kind of a numbness?
Yeah.
Nothing. That's a good signifier that says, you need to respond in some way. What do you do when you start to notice that? I think that's really common for lots of blokes.
Some things that I've done, this is definitely not advice for anyone.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily the best solution. But I found it's been quite helpful for me to access my emotions through my physical body, through either exercise or some physical practices. And so over the years, I actually use cycling a lot as a way of accessing my emotions, whether it's going on like really long rides or training at a really high intensity.
So your body would start to feel something.
Yeah, it would provoke emotions, especially like if I jump on a stationary bike train and listen to music, particular music, and ride, bring out these emotions.
Yes.
And I don't think that was necessarily the best way to do it, but it was like a way of me actually accessing those feelings.
Yeah.
And then the emotion kind of bubbling over. But I think also just having good conversations where I feel connected.
Yes.
And then I do breath work once a week on a Friday morning. And I find that's really good for me to just connect with my physical body and my emotions and that kind of thing. I definitely think I could do a lot better, but I know there's this.
You found these ways. Yeah. I'm mindful of not giving advice to people as well as people that are listening to us, because it does, I think for different people works in different ways. It's important to understand that. But I think it's very common, particularly for men that I work with, that we'll talk about going to the gym, going on the bike, boxing, something really physical. I often talk to fathers about their young boys that are growing up who often need to do something quite physical to get tired and to regulate. So they need to do something like quite busy, physical, jump on the trampoline if they're really tired and overwhelmed. And then they just like regulate their body post-physical exertion. And there is something about allowing particularly kids, and not just boys, I think girls as well, but boys in particular, do some energy work, do something active, and then let's calm down. And then we can maybe give you some regulation skills afterwards. A lot of blokes talk to me about the same thing. They would rather go to the gym than talking about their feelings straight away because they're not sure what they're feeling. So what you're saying makes sense for lots of blokes. My interest often is that really enough? And I think what you're saying is it may not always be enough because there is something about communicating and sharing your inner thoughts with someone you trust, your partner or a friend or whoever. That is also part of the repertoire of dealing with emotion. which goes back to that meta emotion thing, like the way you feel about feelings, that still blokes feel like they shouldn't be sharing anything. It's very private. Or it goes back into that sort of judgment of, this is not okay, I shouldn't be feeling this way, or something wrong with me, or I'm not manly enough, or I'm weak. Those kind of very internalized messages that are still out there. And so there is something about being able to find a bit of a toolkit, I think, for lots of people.
Yeah. So maybe like the physical practice is a way of getting into the general domain, the general kind of territory of accessing emotions.
Yeah.
I'm very interested in your work as a counselor because it'd be interesting to hear more about how you work with men to sit with their emotions where you're not just like accessing emotion and men just expressing it.
Yeah.
They are inviting it in a controlled way. Like in some ways, I suppose it's like progressive desensitization.
Yeah.
There might be an emotion which is very overwhelming. How do you work with men where you sit together and support them to start to invite those feelings in without them being overwhelming?
I think there are a couple of ways that I tend to work with people. Initially, early on, the first few sessions are often about this kind of very intellectual thought process about feelings and what they notice in themselves anyway. I often try and understand this meta-emotion experience that a bloke has had. So how have you grown up? What have you learned about messaging of emotion? Is it good? Is it bad? And I discover some of the limiting aspects of that. And there are some men that stay really intellectual, like very heady. So it's a good conversation, but it's not particularly a felt sense of something. It's very head-based, logic-based. If I ask a question of someone, what do you notice about yourself as you're talking about something that's quite difficult? What do you notice in the way you're talking? What do you notice in your body as you're talking to me? And it's a kind of odd question because it can feel a bit confronting, but it's often interesting to think about. I notice something in my chest or in my gut, or I notice something in my voice is changing, or I notice that my head's full of stuff and I'm a bit cloudy. And these are little cues. I will say to someone, let's just slow down that experience right now, just for a moment, and just pay attention to the physical sensation of what you first noticed. And it's often related to the gut or sometimes in the chest. And often it's just an irritability or a restlessness. And I'll teach men a sort of mindfulness-based skill, which literally slows people down. Take a few breaths and focus your attention on that part of the body and see if you can describe it to me. What's the texture? Can you describe the actual experience? Is it soft? Is it hard? Is it smooth? Is it like restless? Is it painful? Where is it in your body? And if we slow down a bit more, eventually after a minute, can you name what this actually feels like? And it doesn't matter what it is, it's just your own version of what it feels like. And then we play with this idea of the capacity to slow down during the day and spend a minute naming your physical experience and giving it some kind of language that represents a feeling and what could that be about. And it usually takes about a minute or so to get to that point.
Hello. I'm sorry for interrupting this episode. I'm just dropping by, firstly, to ask you a question. What do you think the most common complaint most men and women make about their relationship? Well, it's communication problems. You thought I was going to say sex, didn't you? Well, that is actually a close second. But so many men in particular complain that they get tongue-tied and twisted when trying to communicate or open up with their partner, and often they end up shutting down or just saying the wrong things. So what is good communication in a relationship, I hear you ask? I'm so glad that you did. Well, I've actually created a free guide, Better Conversations for Blokes. It's a quick and easy guide to improving communication in your relationship. It's got heaps of tips and tricks and skills and actual phrases that you can use right now. It's made just for you. You can get the free guide in the show notes. Finish the episode and check out the show notes, and find a way of improving your communication with your partner right now.
Yeah, that's so interesting. That sounds so powerful. So, because you're not trying to help them work through problems and solve them. All you're talking about here is helping men to tune into what's actually going on.
Exactly. And often the tuning in skill, I think for most of us, if we're learning something new, we need somebody else on, I think, one-to-one in a session where we can open up the experience of something safely, allows men to get out of their head and much more into their body. And the chances are that they'll start to learn the language of looking out for cues, like you were saying at the beginning about, I noticed my body first. And I reckon that's a really good first point of call for most of us. Unless you've got a very good emotional language very quickly, then it's usually somewhere in the nervous system in some way.
This is what I discovered about physical exercise, because I thought a lot about why I like to use it to access my emotions. Is because it's actually like a simulation of suffering in a way that I'm in control of. Like, it's not genuine suffering because I can switch it off whenever I want to. It's almost like I'm practicing the experience of going into discomfort, knowing that I can switch it off. And maybe the next step is like through therapy, in a way you're doing that as well. Like, you are in a controlled way, just gently maybe stepping a little bit deeper into emotion. But you're not in the real world, let's say. There's a lot more factors that, could overwhelm you. You're working together to almost strengthen your ability to sit with that comfort.
Yeah, exactly. And I think often if I give people homework to do, something like a bit of slow breathing and naming your experience and reflecting on why, it actually only takes about a minute. For some people, making notes and journaling and looking at themes that are going on, that's really useful information, either to bring back into therapy or to reflect on for yourself. Constant themes come up all the time. Whatever the issue is it a generic thing or is it quite specific? And significantly in terms of feelings, and this is, I think, where some of the men I work with, and I had the same confusion when I first looked at this in my own personal development. It's, what's the point? So I'm feeling something. So why? Often it gives us a bit of I think maybe a bit of a guidance system that we need something as opposed to avoiding it completely. So what do your feelings need? I don't know what that's like for you. I know you're doing your own work, you do your own stuff individually as well. But if you're talking to your partner about how you're going, the need is usually associated with validation, maybe support, care. And a lot of blokes still feel like they should be doing it on their own.
It's a hard balance because sometimes there can be a temptation to like use your partner as a therapist almost, where you can end up oversharing or burdening them, and then the other extreme is to just clam up and not share at all.
It's finding something in the middle.
Especially if you've had a hard day and then it's almost dumping. Then on the other hand, you just stay silent. It's also not helpful. So it's very challenging to navigate that space. And that's where I think it's so important to have some kind of other outlet that it's not so dependent just on your partner, whether it's a men's group or a counselor or other kind of practices.
I'm making sure that the balancing out is interesting because I reckon when I look at my relationship work, when I work with couples, there's a theme that tends to show up, and this is very generalized, highly stereotypical. So it's not for everybody and not every man or every woman. But most women I meet are highly tuned emotionally, highly tuned. I have conversations with women, and this is in my relationship to some degree as well, where partners who are women are really good at talking almost nonstop about what they're feeling. So it just keeps going. And a lot of the men that I work with can't keep up with it or lose track of it. And it ends up being with a lot of blokes being slightly behind the eight ball when it comes to knowing what to say or what to do with their partner's feelings, let alone their own feelings. And within couples, sometimes couples can be almost flooded by one partner's emotion. Now, it's not always women, to be fair. I have to be very careful here because it's not just women. But but there is something very common in my work that comes up a lot, where blokes will say to me, I can't keep up with her. She's got all this great capacity to be emotional and I can't even start. So he closes down. He stops at some point listening, but also stays really logical and really intellectual as a way of coping. And what she wants is just to be validated. So I think some of the themes around this, and this is, again, goes back into my own personal life, where in some ways I've had to work very hard at being emotionally open, not in competition with my partners, but so they get to know me and they learn to listen to me. And that's the dance a bit of the emotional dance between generally men and women. I know it's a big generalization. I have to be very careful because it's not all men and women, but it comes up in my conversations a lot with blokes. I can't keep up with my partner's emotion, so I'd rather shut it down or shut mine down and listen to her. And then there's a kind of a blank wall that gets left.
I think it's also important to emphasize that because we're talking about the ability to sit with discomfort, to sit with feelings,
Yes.
that it's not necessarily the ability to express emotions, but what we're talking about is like the very, very challenging skill that I find very challenging.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily to do anything. It might actually just be to do
To
nothing.
be with.
But as you're experiencing whether it's your emotions that are coming up for you, or
Yeah.
you're with your partner who is expressing ideas or feelings that
Yeah.
feel overwhelming, actually just to be able to hear them.
Yeah, it's
and
enough.
to not react or block it out or anything like that. That's really the skill, which I'm really trying to work out, that I find very challenging.
I think it's very hard. I think that's, for me, it's an ongoing work in progress as
Yeah.
well. And when I talk to people about it, I think the purpose of it is just to keep on finding a practice that is workable. And it's not perfect, but at least we're making a start on something. Being with an emotion that's uncomfortable requires safety of a space. It needs a bit of privacy sometimes as well. And it needs quite a bit of persistence. Because I reckon, I don't know about you, as we get older, I think the more we practice this stuff, the more we're more able to sit with our emotions that become more and more vulnerable as we get older.
Yeah.
We get wiser as we get older, but we also get a bit more vulnerable as we get older. We start to feel things that are different to when we were 20 to when I'm now in my 60s. And I think there's a real practice of that, doing something like that on our own and not always with our partner. But the avoidance of our feelings creates all sorts of dilemmas for people.
This is where your work is so important, where men get to, in a controlled environment, practice sitting with unbearable emotions and doing it in a gentle way, and working together with you to just gently encounter it and start to learn that it's not overwhelming, because that's probably the main reason why I have blocked out emotions, is because I think it's going to obliterate me.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Not logically, but I actually think it's going to overwhelm me. And then the more I can start to experience that it's uncomfortable, but it's okay, and to start to practice that more, then I can go more into those uncomfortable feelings.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because I think that's really common. And I think that's probably what a lot of people get fearful of, that whatever we're feeling is going to completely engulf us in some way. So we'd rather not go there. But it is a bit like just a dripping tap. It's not like open up the faucet and just you're gushing with stuff. We do it gently and slowly. I don't think we can live a life that's purely always just about emotion. We have to be able to balance our stoicism and our pragmatism with our emotional lives, because we want to be able to function well at the same time as not just collapse into our feelings. When you think about where to start, what is the starting point for people that you know that are listening to this, where you could say as a guy, where's the first place to start for them, do you think?
I think if you can find the right counselor, someone that you can connect with, to me, that just makes sense to give that a try and to sit with someone and to practice. For me, different physical practices help to support that.
Yes.
And then a lot of it is just the ability to do nothing. Like I jokingly came up with a self-help book called The Power of Doing Nothing.
Yeah.
And then I think someone actually ended up making a book like that. But so much of the time, just the ability to practice not doing anything can sometimes be the most powerful thing.
Yes.
Like when something happens that challenges you emotionally or feels overwhelming or something like that, resisting the urge to immediately act.
Yeah.
So in a work context, to resist the urge to, if something's disturbing you, jump on and send an email
Yeah.
and then later on regret it.
Yeah.
Because in the moment you feel like it's relieving you by expressing yourself, but then later on, I've had this experience where I look back and think, oh, I shouldn't actually send that email.
Yeah.
So started to resist that temptation to immediately try and fix things and just notice, oh, this thing's going on. I actually don't have to fix it immediately. And then sometimes things have a way of resolving themselves, but other times actually just the emotion has a way of settling.
Yeah.
And then I realized, you know what, I actually didn't need to take any action. I just needed to feel that emotion, let it bounce around in me and let it actually pass through me.
So it's a really good example of learning to regulate before you react. There's one particular skill that I often use is become grounded. So when we sit with our thoughts for a moment and we watch our thoughts just play out in our head without reacting to anything, it can often feel like there's just a lot going on that we have to think about and do, that it stops us from actually just sitting with ourselves. We get forced to go and do something or follow our thoughts in some way. And the first exercise that I think about sitting with our feelings or being with is to learn to breathe and start to notice where our thoughts are going and stay focused on anchoring ourselves in the present moment. But breath work is great for that. Certain kinds of breath work where we stay a bit grounded and anchored, and we learn to watch our thoughts and feelings as opposed to act on them straight away. And I reckon when we're doing that first off, we can start to then find a bit of clarity.
Definitely. And I think another challenge is dividing feelings up into good and bad. So this whole binary thing of there's certain good things, so kindness, love, compassion, patience, etc., etc. There's all these good practices that you're supposed to do. And then there's all these bad things, jealousy, anger, rage, whatever it might be.
Yes.
And what I found as I've started to actually practice accepting the feeling that I'm having, like I remember when I was first starting my business, and I remember having a look at work that other people were doing, and I'd see their work was better than mine, or they looked to be more successful than I was, or their website was better.
Yeah.
Or all these things. And I remember this feeling of almost like rage in my body, of this burning jealousy and maybe even shame or whatever it might be, of they're better than me, I'm not good enough, all these sort of thoughts.
Yeah.
But I think this just happened by accident, but I actually just started to let myself express that. Actually not express it, but just feel it.
Yeah.
So I remember for a few minutes, I would just feel almost like this heat in my body, and I just let it pass through. And then, but I just give myself a limited time.
Yes.
So, okay.
Yeah.
Good. You've done that now. What are you going to do? What actions are you going to take?
Yeah.
Rather than saying, you shouldn't be feeling that. Jealousy's bad. People say things like you do, all this sort of like throwaway new age kind of things.
Yeah.
But why not actually, there's nothing wrong with feeling something.
Yeah.
It's how you act. It's how you express yourself. And where do all those feelings go?
Yes.
You don't allow them to pass through you.
I like that. And it reminds me a bit of trying to understand what acceptance looks like in terms of emotion and the psychological experience of being with something. And acceptance really is about making room for what it is you're thinking and feeling, as opposed to avoiding or judging or whatever. And it's part of the conversations I have with a lot of people is let's just accept what's there. We give it a safe space and a bit of processing work, but actually whatever you're feeling and thinking is okay. The idea is all emotions are fine. Every feeling is okay. I think often we get a bit caught up with the judgment, but also the behaviors that go with it. But you're allowed to feel whatever you want to feel. If you give yourself space and time to process that, accept it for what it is, be with it, what happens? Usually the feelings themselves tend to dissipate and diffuse, as opposed to when we rally against it, it works against us. And in some ways, it makes the feelings even bigger. So there's something about learning what it means to accept what we're sitting with. I accept all that I have, all that I'm experiencing right now. There's no reason to worry about the fact that I feel envious, angry. I need to be able to sit with it and actually look after it in some way. Emotional acceptance is the kind of antidote to the idea of avoiding feelings.
Yeah, and it's interesting because over the years, as I have looked around and done that practice of seeing what other people are doing,
Yes.
noticing their work and that kind of thing, over the years, it's transformed into an admiration and a respect. And often now when I'm doing that same process, I'm almost like a fan where I see something that's
Right.
better than mine, where in the old days would feel that
you can appreciate it more.
I do.
Yes.
Yeah, it's just
Yeah.
moved. I just don't feel that same feeling now. Like
Yeah.
it has evolved.
There's something about finding a ritual and a practice that actually means that you can learn to sit with, or into, it's almost like a teaching in itself. So I reckon if the people listening out there, if you're searching for something, part of it's to do with the work that I'm doing, but look out for somebody who's actually teaching you how to sit with your feelings, because the value and the benefits are huge.
What would you say to men who like the idea of it, but if they imagine themselves doing something like counselling, that it feels overwhelming, or scary, or just too much to take on?
I would say sit with that for a little while and just sit with what that actually feels like and what it means. I also think that we're talking about today is incredibly common in most of the work that I do with men. I think most counselors and therapists will say the same thing. You just come with where you're at. And that may be, I don't know why I'm here and I'm worried about being here. Let's just start from there. And that's a great way of starting a conversation. There are plenty of books to read. There are people doing this stuff on YouTube and videos around the world about how to be more able to sit with your feelings and the values of it and the purpose of it. So do some reading first, but go onto my website and check out work that I'm doing with people. It takes a bit of courage. I don't know what this is your experience, but I reckon it takes a bit of courage to learn something like this, because there is something about it that can feel quite uncomfortable. We can have fear, but you have to have courage to make the change. And it's just the first step, really, in a way.
Definitely. Yeah. Look, for me, it's been a very long, slow, imperfect process.
Yeah.
And I have many memories of times that have just felt, I've just collapsed or felt overwhelmed or that sort of thing. And it's just been a messy process of trial and error to slowly work my way out of those old habits.
Yeah. And it's a really good reminder for most of us that it is messy and it can feel a bit awkward. But as you get through it, as you keep moving through it, you start to get a bit more graceful with it. Thank you. I really appreciate it today. And I always keep learning more about you as well as anything else. So hopefully people that are listening will find that useful as well. So I appreciate it. Thanks, Ryan.
Yeah. Thanks, Howard.
The art of sitting with your feelings is really about pressing the pause button and checking in with yourself, tuning in to really understand what's going on beneath the surface. Now, for most of us, life moves pretty quickly. It's easy to get distracted and push away any kind of feelings. But taking a few minutes to sit with what you're feeling can really help you to get clear and stay grounded and even make better decisions. When you give yourself this space to notice what's inside of you, you're building the resilience and real confidence in your emotional awareness that can only help you in your everyday life, but also in your relationship with the people that you love. Now, I would love to hear your thoughts about this. Let me know on Instagram at Man Talk with Howard. If this episode sparks more of an interest in some online products that I've got and programs that are available, check the show notes. If this conversation of Ryan and I that triggers some awareness that you want to work on this whole idea of sitting with your feelings, you can make some time to talk with me. There's a booking button there. You can make an appointment, and I look forward to speaking with you. For the moment, thank you for listening. If you like what you hear, please tell your mates. Give me a review wherever you find the podcast. It really helps. And I'll catch you again in the next episode of Man Talk.